Hey guys, wanted to take the opportunity to show you a little bit about creating a vector portrait. So let me dive right in and show you what that's all about. I want to start by looking at a little bit of my process. And so I like to start with a sketch based on some photography. In this case, I decided to do a drawing of a portrait that I'd taken and did a rough sketch on my iPad using Procreate. And you can see how taking that image, I wanted to turn this into a stylized kind of caricature. Not quite a cartoon caricature, but more of what I would consider in the neighborhood of kind of glamour art or some sort of comic illustration where I'm focusing on bolder lines, detail lines, but I'm not really trying to do shading or anything like that. I'm really trying to focus on the line work. Then what I'll do is I'll take that and work on a line art version. And so in Illustrator, I'll just separate my layers and start working with the pen tool and start doing detail lines, focusing on specific features. I find, especially looking at someone like Patrick Nagel, who inspires this kind of artwork, I find that focusing on the eyes, the lips, and certain important features of the face, you can really start to capture the necessary likeness. And you can diminish other features. You don't really need to work on a highly pronounced nose in a female glamour portrait. You kind of diminish some of those, harsh lines on the cheekbone or other areas like that. Try to keep it smoother and lighter. So once the line art is done, I've kind of figured out where I want to take that. I start duplicating that layer and I make it into color pieces. And I start to colorize the different lines. I work on adding flat shape areas. Typically what I'll do is use either the Pathfinder or another tool to flatten my art and create outlines of the strokes. And then can use the paint bucket or some other method for adding color. Then I start working on other features, separating backgrounds from edges and other lines, and becomes a complete picture. So in that process, I'm trying to work up from a sketch using layers to separate the pieces to focus in specific areas first. Now, when approaching a portrait, you've got a few challenges to overcome. And one of them is when and where to add detail and when and where to simplify. And so we're going to use this example, this photo of this eye, as a way to kind of talk about simplifying and using basic lines to indicate what you want. Now, when trying to recreate a photograph in 2D art, you have to make some compromises. You have to decide, okay, what is going to be considered an edge? What's going to be a detail line? Where am I going to put a contour, and how am I going to indicate that, especially in flat art like this, where I'm not trying to do photographic shading or painterly detail. I'm actually trying to make it more, two-dimensional, flat, with single colors, single silhouettes. Things like eyelashes or hair, those can cause a lot of trouble because you have a lot of competing lines, and you really don't want to get lost in trying to illustrate those directly, at least for this style. So what I tend to do is I just go straight for the pen tool. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up my tools so that with the pen tool, I'm going to use a bright red color. That always helps me as I kind of illustrate and figure out where I'm going. And just kind of dive in, and you try to decide, okay, what am I going to trace? What am I going to simplify, and what's going to remain? And personally, with experience and for this type of style, I like simplifying the upper lid first, in the upper eyelash area. I like making it into more of a solid shape. And so by condensing this down into a solid pointy shape, angular shape, I'm ignoring a lot of those stray eyelashes. I really don't want to focus on those. I don't want At least I don't need to illustrate them individually. Also, it gives you a sense of shading when you have the upper lid, which might be covered with eyeshadow anyways, and just to give it a little more dimension, that rounded upper area of the eye. Okay, so I might fiddle with that a little bit more, but just in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep going. It's also good to indicate this fold area where the brow kind of encircles the eye socket. Now that filled in because I have a fill color here. I'm going to swap that and turn that into a line. And I'm going to open my stroke palette so I can modify that line and give it a little more detail. So I'm going to thicken that line, and then actually I'm going to swap that profile so that instead of being a bulky squared edge on the line, I'm going to switch that profile to a pointy line. So in this method of drawing, I'm not trying to create solid shapes to fill with color. I don't care about that right now. Really, what I'm worried about most is the contour and the line placement. Okay, maybe I'll come down here and do a bottom lid. Now, something that I'm looking for too is, keeping that curve smooth. So that means the fewer the lines you use, the better. Of course, one of my favorite things about drawing in Illustrator is the fact that nothing is permanent and you can keep tweaking it, twisting it, and move it around to be where you want. Now there is, in human anatomy here, there is a separation between the lower lid, a ridge on that lid that separates the eye from the eyelashes. So it's good, at least in this case, I'm going to leave a gap. I'm not going to push that right up against the edge of the eye. It needs to have a little bit of space. And if I wanted to indicate that, I could with a separate line, maybe a thinner line, just to indicate that there is a little bit of a rounded shape there. And maybe swap that for a thinner line and give it, just a little bit more character and detail there. All right, now let's focus on the eye itself. What I'm going to do is draw an ellipse. So I'm going to draw a circle. And here, what I can do is go back to a normal uniform line. Kind of get it in position. Then I can use another one for the pupil inside. And something typical of glamour art, and it's kind of visible here on this photograph, is one of the things that really sells an eye and makes it really pop are the specular highlights, the glossy area that shows up on top of the black pupil or the iris, a shiny spot that you see on an eye. And in this case, it's not super pronounced, and it's a little bit too abstract for my needs. So what I can do is create some little invented highlight here that reacts. Oh, let me swap that to white, maybe put a little stroke on it too. There we go. So get a little bit of that. Now, what you might see in anime or something else, sometimes they have double specular highlights, maybe one large, one small. Really extreme, you might even stretch that across the eye, make it look kind of like some sort of a lens flare. So you can certainly play around with that. But I'm going to stick with just kind of a single little highlight there, kind of put it in position. Okay, last couple things here. I'm going to real quick work on kind of an abstract silhouette for the eyebrow. Again, I'm not trying to get those little individual strands of hair. I'm just trying to create the impression of that shape. Put with a little bit of a twist, a turn. Kind of get back to where I started here. I don't know what you call that shape, but tends to have kind of a blunt end and a tapered end off the edge of the eyebrow there. So if I swap that, turn off the white, you know, I'm getting more of a traditional kind of comic style eyebrow. So let me turn off the photo and you can see what I'm left with. Kind of a glamorized view of that eye. So you could refer to some of the other videos after this if you want to get into the coloring, because this would be similar to the other processes I've used in the past, where you separate the color on a separate layer, or you flatten and outline the stroke and use the paint bucket to kind of fill in the colors. And then you might even use something like the knife tool to create shadow areas and things like that. So I'm going to leave you there for the tracing part of this demonstration, and hope that helps. And next time we're going to talk about how to illustrate hair.